The Duke of York was used to say, Lilibet is my pride and Margaret is my joy. And as far as Princess Margaret was concerned, he really couldn't take his eyes off this child. I mean, she was so beautiful that he couldn't believe that he'd created this glorious and beautiful child, and then he rather spoilt her.
The princess's public life began early, and here we see her during a Scottish holiday, arriving with a family party at a Highland gathering.
Neither girl was prepared for the lives they were to lead. As two daughters of a second-born prince, Elizabeth and Margaret had no expectations of being thrust into the international spotlight.
With the Duke and Duchess of York, there was never any anticipation that they would succeed to the throne, and certainly never any expectation that Princess Elizabeth would come to the throne.
It was, of course, always possible that George and Elizabeth would have further children, and a male heir would, of course, then leapfrog Elizabeth in line for the throne. So it was always a fairly remote possibility that she would become queen at her birth.
The Duke and Duchess of York, us four, as the Duke called them, rather anticipated a cosy family life in the way that they were already enjoying. And they were a very natural family and a very loving family.
It was the girl's uncle, the charming bachelor Prince David, who would be the next king. He was expected to marry and have children of his own, who would one day inherit the crown. Elizabeth and Margaret were set for a life of comfortable semi-obscurity. Until 1936, the year everything changed. Late on the 20th of January, King George V died at Sandringham.
He'd been unwell for quite some time, and it went back to the Great War, when he was thrown from his horse while reviewing troops in France and suffered from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and pleurisy. Now, that's a progressive condition, so it didn't get any better.
The only witness to the king's final moments in this regard were his physician, and his physician claims to have administered a lethal dose of morphine and cocaine to ease the king's passing, believing as he did in a gentle adoption of euthanasia.
It was also thought that it was far better that the king's death should be announced in the morning paper, the Times, rather than the slightly more down-market evening papers.
Elizabeth and Margaret's uncle David was proclaimed king and became Edward VIII. But the new monarch had never wanted the crown. Indeed, he was terrified by the idea. There was another complication. The king was in love with American divorcee Wallis Simpson and was set on marrying her. The wider British establishment, however, was far from taken with the idea.
Wallis Simpson was loose, irreverent, dashing, very much symbolised that kind of New World glamour, which endeared her very greatly to Edward, but did not endear her to the remainder of the family.
Wallis had been twice divorced, and that was unheard of in the British monarchy and in those social circles. And so that was a reason for not liking her.
He very much actually didn't really want to be king. He may not have even been able to voice that, but unless he was even stupider than I think he was, he must have realized that nobody was going to accept a woman as queen with two husbands living. That was the problem.
The secular head of state is also the supreme governor of the Church of England. He was about to go through a coronation ceremony that is very similar to the kind of consecration that a priest goes through. Anointed with holy oil, with water. It's a dedication.
For such a clear hypocritical breach to exist as him marrying a divorcee would, especially in the context of these times, have been wholly unacceptable.
I don't think he took at all well to being monarch. I think he didn't have the patience for it.
His own grasp of detail, particularly in regards to the empire, particularly in regards to the industrial disputes which were enveloping the country, really left quite a lot to be desired. Indeed, it is said that George V predicted, rather darkly, that if Edward became king, he'd ruin himself within a year.
A constitutional crisis was gripping Britain. The public were unaware, the press was muzzled, and the king's affair kept secret. Finally, unable to renounce the woman he loved, the king gave up his crown. On December the 11th, 1936, Edward abdicated. He had been king less than a year.
It was a shock. It was seen, I think, popularly as a dereliction of duty.
There were those who thought Edward should stay and should be allowed to marry Wallis Simpson, and there were those who just thought this man is a waste of space and he's got to go. And Wallis Simpson, let's say, saved the monarchy from a man who would have been a pretty awful king.
A crowd gathered outside Bertie's house in Piccadilly. The new king's family had moved out of their home into the vast and cold magnificence of Buckingham Palace. The lives of Elizabeth and Margaret were transformed. Elizabeth was now next in line to the throne. The training for her future role began at once. In 1936, following the abdication of Edward VIII, the throne passed to Elizabeth and Margaret's father, Bertie. He became George VI. On the 12th of May 1937, he was crowned at Westminster Abbey.
George was wholly unprepared for being king. He himself said that it was like a lamb being led to the slaughter. There was an established convention of not using first Christian name, but using middle names to rule under, and he chose George simply because within the Hanoverian tradition, there had already been 5 Georges, and of course, the previous monarch was called George II, and he wanted very much to embody stability after the chaos and confusion of the abdication crisis.
The Duke of York realised that he might have to step forward and become king without having had any experience at all of state papers, any of the training that his brother had had. He went in absolutely cold.
King George would ensure that his elder daughter Elizabeth would be more prepared for the role of monarch. From 1938, she received private tuition from Sir Henry Martin, the Vice Provost of Eton College. Her father explained the nature of the official dispatch boxes that were the monarch's everyday duty. Margaret was excluded. The sisters' once identical upbringing was diverging.
That expectation of being well educated does not extend to Margaret, who continues to be educated as a well-mannered, accomplished girl who was expected to go on and marry. So singing, piano lessons, French conversation become important, but not constitutional history, not the hard lessons of theology.
They were still loving sisters with the same bond that they always shared.